Larry has vivid dreams.
That kill women?
The American crime drama miniseries Blackbird, inspired by true events, premiered on Apple TV Plus on July 8, 2022. With an IMDB rating of 8.1 and a Rotten Tomatoes freshness score of 98%, it's proof of the adaptation's success. Today, let me introduce you to the real-life figure behind the series, a man who appears harmless and has been considered intellectually disabled from a young age, but is a suspect in cases of kidnapping, rape, murder, and serial killings. Since his arrest, he has confessed to more than 35 murders, yet U.S. authorities believe he may be responsible for the deaths and disappearances of 40 to 50 young women, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. He is Larry DeWayne Hall. On December 11, 1962, Larry and his twin brother Gary were born in Wabash, Indiana. Their father was a sexton at a church outside of Wabash, whose most important job was digging graves in the church's cemetery. This job paid well, and the family could live in a house provided by the church for free. Their house was situated on a ridge, in a corner of the cemetery, overlooking neatly arranged tombstones. Their father was an alcoholic with a violent temper, and their mother was domineering and fierce, making the children around them think of their parents as the scary monsters from fairy tales. When Larry and Gary were born, Gary was healthy, but Larry was bruised all over, almost as if he were dead. According to a medical theory, Gary had taken away Larry's nutrients while they were developing in the womb. As they grew up, Gary became tall and slim, lively and extroverted. Larry, on the other hand, was short, overweight, and extremely shy. Gary liked making friends and initiating various activities, while Larry was like a gentle and silent shadow, following Gary around. After the twins entered high school, Gary started dating and had several girlfriends. Larry, unnoticed, could no longer follow Gary around as before because the girls would always pull Gary away from home. In 1981, they graduated from high school. 3 years later, their father was fired by the church due to his worsening alcoholism, and the family moved into a very simple small house. Soon after, Gary, Larry, and another male friend went on a trip to the West. To save money, they chose to camp overnight. During the trip, a girl hitched a ride with them. Years later, Gary confessed to the police that he had always felt guilty for taking advantage of the girl, while Larry had raped her. Larry's violent and brutal side deeply shocked him at the time. His only hobby at the time was driving his '84 Dodge two-tone van around the city, looking for discarded Chrysler classic car parts to sell to used car dealerships and repair shops. In 1988, he mustered the courage to join a local society that reenacted the 19th Indiana Volunteer Infantry Regiment, Iron Brigade. Gary was also attracted by Larry's new hobby and joined the Iron Brigade Society. The members of the Iron Brigade Society were true enthusiasts of the Civil War, tirelessly doing their utmost to restore history, so much so that they were collectively invited to be extras in 2 Civil War-themed movies due to their reputation. In October 1990, he appeared with long sideburns. As he later explained to a reporter, he had been promoted from infantry to commander in the reenactment activities, and having sideburns better suited his character setting. On the evening of March 29, 1993, at 8 p.m. in Marion, Indiana, a student from Indiana Wesleyan University, Tricia, walked to the nearby Marsh supermarket. She bought some soda and magazines and, like many other ordinary nights before, she was walking back to school along the same route. The school was only a few blocks away from the Marsh supermarket, and the entire campus could be seen from the supermarket's rooftop. However, at midnight, her father suddenly received an emergency call from the school, asking if he knew where Tricia was at the moment. It turned out that Tricia had not returned to school that night and had vanished into thin air on the road she frequently traveled. Without any clues, Trisha's heartbroken parents and the police sought help from the public through newspapers and local television stations. But no one knew where the 19-year-old Trisha had gone. A week later, as the day began to darken, two female students left the Marsh supermarket and walked forward along the only avenue to the campus, the same path where Trisha had disappeared. Gradually, they noticed a brown and white van slowly driving past them, over and over again, a total of 3 times. They started to get nervous, and on the last pass, the van slowly stopped in front of them. As they passed by, the person inside stuck his head out of the window and started talking to them. Terrified, they ran forward without looking back. After reaching the school, they reported their encounter to the campus police and described the man who followed them as having a thick beard. The Marion police quickly found the two-tone van, and the driver's name was Larry Hall. Larry said he couldn't find his friend's house address, so he kept circling around, asking for directions. It sounded reasonable, and the police let Larry go. It was only much later that they realized the address of the so-called friend's house Larry had given them didn't exist at all. 6 months later, on September 20th, 1993, in Georgetown, Illinois, a 3-hour drive from Marion, where the college student Trisha had disappeared. In the afternoon, 15-year-old Jessica also vanished. Her cherished mountain bike left beside a gravel road, less than 50 meters from her home. When Jessica set off on her bike, she told her sister that she was going to the school to help decorate a float for the homecoming parade. When her sister returned from shopping at the store, she discovered the bike lying on the side of the road, abandoned and alone, a feeling of fear overwhelming her. Their father reported her missing. Jessica's parents were devout Jehovah's Witnesses, leading a simple life with minimal social interactions. The family lived in a large trailer outside Georgetown, surrounded by vast cornfields. After arriving, Vermilion County Sheriff Miller examined the bike and the nearby terrain and learned a bit about Jessica's background. Quickly, Sheriff Miller judged that this was not a case of a typical teenage runaway. Something terrible had happened. After ruling out an acquaintance as the perpetrator, the county police reported the missing case to the FBI. 6 weeks after Jessica disappeared, on the other side of the cornfield near her home, within Indiana, a farmer discovered a highly decomposed naked body in his field. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the coroner was only able to successfully extract one fingerprint, which confirmed that the body was the missing Jessica. The autopsy report indicated that Jessica had been strangled to death with a heavy blow to her jaw prior to the strangulation. No clues related to the murderer were found. Months later, local residents reported to the police that on the night Jessica disappeared, they had seen a man standing at the location where Jessica's body was found, with a van parked nearby, but they could not make out the make and color of the van. A year later, a significant breakthrough occurred. Sheriff Miller, while reviewing recent local police station reports, was breathless at one particular alert. On a street in Georgetown, where Jessica's family lived, 2 14-year-old girls were riding their bicycles when a man in a van approached and harassed them. Sensing danger, the girls quickly turned into a nearby path inaccessible to vehicles and hurried home. After hearing about the incident, a father drove the 2 girls around the small town, found the still wandering van, noted its license plate, and then reported it to the police. The license plate was from Indiana, a neighboring state of Illinois, and the van was registered to a man named Larry. Miller also discovered that Larry, driving a vehicle from another state and wandering aimlessly around Georgetown, had been stopped and questioned by local police 3 times. Later, Miller learned that, in just the 6 months from March to September 1993, 11 girls had reported being harassed by Larry, but their reports had never been taken seriously by the police. With permission, Miller went to the Wabash City Police Department for an informal interview with Larry. Larry had a chubby body and a harmless-looking round face with sideburns common among American men centuries ago. which he claimed was for easily cosplaying a Union Army commander, and spoke in a meek, sheepish tone. Miller first asked him about harassing the two girls in Georgetown. Miller asked, "Have you been near Georgetown?" Larry couldn't quite remember, but he did recall driving to a small town that day. Then, he remembered some landmark buildings of that town, including a Hardee's, where he had stopped several times to talk to girls. "It's just because I like talking to people," Larry explained. "What did you talk to them about?" "I asked their names and ages, and if they needed a ride." "Did you chase them?" "No, sir, I didn't," Larry answered. "If I did, it was just for fun." Suddenly, a local police officer burst in and said to Larry, "Why don't you talk to him about those dreams you've had?" After a terrifying silence, Larry said, "Sometimes I dream about killing women, but I think it's just a dream." Larry continued, "I feel like I'm leaving my body, floating in midair, watching myself." "Do you remember what you're doing?" "I can't remember, just that I'm doing something bad." Then, Miller pulled out a photo of Jessica from his briefcase, a girl with a radiant smile, doe-like eyes, and long brown hair. Larry recoiled, averted his gaze, and raised his arm in front of his eyes as if the photos were a blinding light. But he denied ever seeing Jessica. Although intuition told Miller that Larry was the murderer, he had no evidence, only a conversation about dreams. Miller also reached out to the Marion, Indiana, police department responsible for the disappearance of a female college student, Tricia, but they too did not consider Larry a suspect and were not prepared to investigate him. Faced with dead ends, Sheriff Miller sought help from the FBI. Since Jessica disappeared in Illinois and her body was found outside the state in Indiana, involving homicides across 2 states, the FBI had the authority to intervene in the investigation. On November 15, 1994, with Larry's consent, Sheriff Miller and an FBI agent named Mike went to Wabash City to administer a polygraph test on Larry. Then, Larry told Mike that he always felt very lonely and had an urge to be with women. Mike asked him if this urge was irresistible. Larry said yes, he had to satisfy it. Then, Mike pulled out Jessica's photo again, and Larry averted his gaze once more, but a tear rolled down his cheek. After a few minutes of silence, Mike said, "Let's start talking about that weekend?" Larry, with his head bowed and speaking in his meek, sheepish tone, began. "I tied her up, but I don't remember what I used to tie her. I took off her pants and had intercourse with her." Afterward, Larry said he had Jessica walk into the woods, sit under a tree, and then he strangled her with a belt from behind the tree until she stopped breathing, so he wouldn't have to face her. Then, he almost revealed everything he did to Tricia: kidnapping, rape, murder, except for the final dumping site. Then, he vaguely and ambiguously mentioned the process of killing other girls. 2 girls were killed by him in Indiana, and another near a reenactment site in Wisconsin. All the girls looked alike. I can't remember all of them. In other places, I picked up some girls, but I can't remember which ones were harmed by me. The next day, Miller obtained an arrest warrant approved by the Illinois local prosecutor. To his surprise, under Indiana law, Larry could be extradited back to Illinois for trial without a hearing, as he voluntarily waived the extradition process. Larry was detained in a county jail in Illinois, and when Miller and Agent Mike interrogated him again, he claimed that his previous confession was just a dream, and he hadn't killed anyone. 3 weeks after Larry's arrest, under the leadership of the FBI, an evidence response team from Washington arrived in Wabash City. They also seized his '84 Dodge van and another van parked in the front yard, used for storage. The team found that the cargo area of the Dodge van had been thoroughly cleaned 3 times with 3 different types of powerful cleaning agents. Inside his van were a large hunting knife, a roll of rope, a ski mask, a can of starting fluid, a pair of gloves, and a stack of cotton. presumably to be soaked with starting fluid to render the victims unconscious. In December 1994, 2 weeks after Larry was extradited to Illinois, led by the FBI, a multi-jurisdictional law enforcement task force was organized to begin investigating nationwide disappearances of women related to Larry. To outsiders, James seemed like a chosen one from childhood. Born in Kankakee, Illinois, in 1969, James had a tall and handsome father who was a local policeman and firefighter, and an elegant and charming mother of Italian descent who ran a very popular restaurant. Handsome, strong, muscular, and athletically gifted, James was always the center of attention wherever he went. However, his life was not as glamorous as it appeared. His parents had a poor relationship since their marriage, constantly arguing, and eventually divorced when James was 11. In high school, both of his parents were in financial crises, and James's expenses seemed meager among a group of wealthy sports enthusiasts. But the physically gifted James was also smart. He quickly found a way to riches: drug trafficking. With his high school academic and sports achievements, James could have attended a very prestigious university, but he chose to go to a community college in the suburbs of Chicago to better conduct his drug business. His clients included porn actors, yuppies, club owners, doctors, lawyers, and even police officers and family members of some prominent politicians. Although James reached a plea agreement with Prosecutor Beaumont, he was still sentenced to 10 years. One day in 1998, not long after James had started serving his sentence, he suddenly received a notice that Prosecutor Beaumont, who had prosecuted him, wanted to meet with him. Accompanied by his lawyer, James met Prosecutor Beaumont and an FBI agent in the prison's meeting room. Before the conversation, they handed James a stack of thick files containing life photos of several young girls and horrifying pictures of their naked corpses, as well as reports from police departments in Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, and even as far as Utah. The file ended with a prison photo of a man named Larry, who had been imprisoned in Indiana since 1994. Prosecutor Beaumont explained to James that Larry was sentenced to life imprisonment for the abduction and murder of Jessica, but they believed he had committed over 20 murders, making him a cruel and terrifying serial killer who specifically targeted underage girls. Therefore, they wanted to strike a deal with James. James was to approach Larry in prison, gain his trust, and get him to reveal the burial site of a victim that the police had not yet discovered. If James obtained the location and the police found the body, he would be released on the spot. However, the most important point was that the deal would not be considered complete without finding the body. After much hesitation and strongly advised by his lawyer, James accepted the deal. A few days later, he was transferred to the maximum security prison in Springfield, Missouri, where Larry was held, a prison specifically for the most dangerous criminals with mental issues. James's first step was to befriend Larry. Wherever he was, as an undercover agent, James had to take great risks. Only the warden and the chief psychiatrist knew James's true identity in the entire prison. An FBI agent would visit him, pretending to be James's girlfriend to exchange information. A few days later, James learned that these people were called child killers by others in the prison, and even the most vicious ones didn't want to associate with them. As he walked past Larry, he accidentally brushed against him. After apologizing, he casually asked, "I'm new here. Do you know where the library is?" Larry took James to the library. James warmly put his arm around Larry's shoulder, just as his twin brother Gary often did, and thanked him, showing enthusiasm for making friends with him. Soon, James was included in the circle of child killers, eating breakfast with Larry every day. One Saturday night, Larry was engrossed in watching his favorite show about serial killers in the TV room, with James sitting beside him. Shortly after, a muscular man approached, ignoring everyone watching TV, and changed the channel. Larry was stunned and only dared to complain quietly to James beside him, I was watching that show." James stood up, landed an uppercut on the muscular man, beating him up until the man ended up in the hospital, and James was put in solitary confinement. It was all worth it. When James was released, he clearly felt Larry's brother-like trust in him, constantly seeking him out to chat and rambling about many things. However, Larry never mentioned why he was in there. For months passed, and James was ready to take action. He told Larry that his mother, who came to visit him, had read news about him, saying he killed many girls. He never expected to hear about his good friend from his own mother. James acted a bit hurt because his good friend didn't trust him. Finally, one night, Larry talked to James about Trisha in their cell. On March 29th, 5 years ago, Larry was slowly driving his van down the street, looking for prey. He targeted Trisha, who was alone, and under the cover of night, threatened her with a hunting knife and forcibly dragged her onto the van. Trisha struggled fiercely, but he choked her neck to silence her. Then, Larry told James that he passed out and lost consciousness. When he woke up, he found Trisha naked and lifeless. He then buried her in the woods. However, James still needed an exact address to gain his freedom. Until one day, James saw Larry staring at a map in the prison's carpentry workshop. Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin were densely marked with many red dots. As soon as Larry saw James coming in, he quickly rolled up the map. Around the map were a dozen wooden carved falcons. When James admired these falcons, Larry told him they were overlooking the deceased. The map, red dots, deceased, falcons. James felt his blood freeze, seeing a ticket to freedom. The red dots on the map were likely Larry's murder or burial sites. "I'm going to send these to my brother Gary," Larry told James. As soon as Larry finished speaking, James found an excuse to rush out and make a phone call. He dialed the first number to the FBI agent who had previously contacted him, who had visited him pretending to be his girlfriend. After several attempts, he only got voicemail, so he left a breathless message. But he believed she would receive his good news within an hour, as before, and intercept that map. Then, James made a decision. He walked over and told Larry that he was a dirty, twisted pervert, a child killer. He hated having to associate with him. After doing all this, James had the best sleep since he had been incarcerated. But shortly after he woke up, several guards came into his cell, and a female doctor rushed over, yelling at him, asking why he harassed and threatened her patient, investigated his case, disturbed his mind, and interfered with her work. It turned out Larry had complained about him in prison. A few minutes later, James was put in solitary confinement, with no one willing to listen to his defense, not even for a second. 2 weeks passed, and James was released because the chief psychiatrist, who knew James's identity, returned from vacation. However, the map and the wooden carved falcons were nowhere to be found in the carpentry workshop. The female agent who was supposed to contact James later explained that it was a problem with the phone system, and she missed James's message. That afternoon, January 1999, James took a small FBI plane to a county jail in Illinois, waiting for his final destination. After a polygraph test, James proved that all the information he knew about Larry in prison was true. But his lawyer told him that the FBI ultimately did not find the map and the wooden falcons, and his mission failed. However, on February 23, 1999, Prosecutor Beaumont proposed a motion for sentence reduction at the hearing, stating Mr. Keene, James, was placed in the Springfield Correctional Facility in Missouri as an undercover agent. He conducted activities for about 6 months. He was able to obtain specific information from the investigation target, which might solve the kidnapping and murder cases in Indiana. During this period, Mr. Keene was always in great danger. A month later, James was released. 5 years later, James's father passed away peacefully with his son by his side. James now lives in Illinois, a successful real estate businessman. James later published a memoir, In with the Devil, which was adapted into the TV series Blackbird, and he is also one of the executive producers of Blackbird. Larry is currently serving his sentence in a federal prison in North Carolina, where he will spend the rest of his life until his death. As the older twin, Hall was a victim of selective intrauterine growth restriction, a condition in twins where one can be stronger or more attractive than the other, with a possible weight difference of more than 25%. While his brother was handsome and well-built, Hall was unattractive and short-statured. For Hall, growing up was a series of humiliations. He found solace in technology, respected only when discussing hardcore knowledge, such as history and technology, or when repairing something. He couldn't understand why his friends could easily win over girls, while he could only manage small talk. When his father went tomb raiding, he always took Hall with him. Hall gradually agreed with the notion. Some people are just too twisted. They take things that could benefit others and hoard them for themselves, hiding them in coffins 2 meters underground. Justice and evil, kindness and malice, normality and abnormality. In Hall's world, everything was reversed. He hated himself for not being manly enough and thus despised girls for being high and mighty. Legally, gender equality has largely been achieved, but on social and cultural levels, gender discrimination still widely exists. Men position themselves in a dominant role, with women seen as accessories. Hunting for trophies becomes a way for men to boast, gaining respect, envy, and admiration from their peers. However, influenced by physiological factors, Hall couldn't compete and, almost deprived of his manhood, he had to compensate with his inner drama for the pain of being excluded from society. Thus, Hall became a demon. But who really created this demon? Is it just Hall's fault? Locking Hall away is easy, but can the tragedy truly end without changing the sick rules? As a viewer, what's your take on this? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. The black bird is circling above, watching us, and in everyone's heart lives a Larry Hall, harboring the world's sins. Never underestimate the malice within. Please, always keep it locked away.